Okay, I was talking earlier with Congressman Fallon about the president's remarks this morning. I watched the president's speech. You know, we watch these things so you don't have to. And I was struck by, this whole focus was supposed to be about reducing junk fees, corporations like banks that charge an overdraft fee. It's quite frankly, it shows how desperate I think this administration is, saying we're going after these junk fees that are going to lower the cost of everyday living for Americans, going after concert ticket and resort fees. But then he went into something I've heard him say many times, and it was about hearing aids. And I thought, man, how many times are we going to hear about this? So I wanted to play this clip of the president who, he's really, this must be a big deal. There must be a lot of voters out there who he is trying to reach. Play that clip, please.
We're going to lower the prices on everything from prescription drugs to hearing aids.
Starting this week, it's a big deal. We're making hearing aids more affordable.
One thing we've done is to make affordable hearing aids available. We've made, for example, hearing aids more affordable and available over the counter at places like Walgreens and Walmart. And Medicare will now cover the cost of hearing aids and hearing checkups.
Making hearing great again. I guess he's going after the hard of hearing vote, and I guess he has to keep repeating it because they can't hear him. I would add if they're hard of hearing and they're going to vote for him, they must be stiff of neck as well. Okay, that said, let's talk post November 8th, where we get into the lame duck session of Congress. I believe, and this is based upon 20 years of doing this, that the 2022 lame duck session of Congress could go down as one of the most dangerous periods in modern American history, politically, as it relates to religious freedom, the sanctity of human life, and the freedom of speech. If the 2010 and 2014 lame duck sessions are any guide, conservatives need to be prepared for a direct assault on each of those issues. And top of the list is this so-called Respect for Marriage Act that is teed up in the Senate for November the 14th. So as we prepare for this lame duck session, what do we need to remember and how do we need to respond? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Connor Semelsberger. He's the Director of Federal Affairs, Life, and Human Dignity here at the Family Research Council. Connor, welcome back to the program.
Great to be back, Tony.
Okay, so let's start with the bill that I just mentioned that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has been vocal about, and I think it's Senator Duckworth has said it's teed up for a vote on or at least begin the discussion on the 14th of November. That is what I call the Disrespect for Marriage Act. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, you couldn't name it any better. It's really disrespecting marriage in its fullest form, attempting to do something that's totally unnecessary, codifying the Obergefell decision. But that's not just all that's behind the book here on what this bill does. It would attack religious freedom, as you mentioned, put in jeopardy, faith-based adoption providers, women's shelters, you name it. That's what this bill puts in the crosshairs. And like you said, it's not just the Tammy Baldwins from Wisconsin pushing this, but some of the lead negotiators are Republican members. Senator Portman from Ohio and Senator Romney from Utah have been working to find some compromise language, but as we all know, these compromises never work out in the way they intend to.
Yeah, thank you for correcting me on that. That was Baldwin that's pushing for that. One of the reasons of concern is that we had 47 Republican members of the House that voted for this. Now, they said they weren't aware, many of them who did vote for this. Of course, it did get hung up in the Senate after we raised these concerns of the threat to religious freedom. But there are some who are leading this effort, Baldwin as well as Senator Tillis of North Carolina, saying, well, they're close to reaching an agreement on protecting religious freedom. Is that true?
So that's what they're gunning for. They want to get those 10 Republican votes, and they think through some, compromise amendment that can get the 10 votes done. But thankfully, there's been some efforts. Senator Mike Lee out of Utah really holding strong and trying to get a rally of members there to say we will not let this go through, even with this compromise language, because even with compromise with some of these Republican senators, like you mentioned, Senator Tillis, it just blunts the sword. It doesn't take away all the concerns we've talked about. And just how egregious this bill is. It just really is some sugarcoating on top to make it look like there's religious freedom protections, but that's what we're trying to monitor down the stretch here to make sure that this does not get through and see the light of day with these extra 10 senators.
So what other measures are on the kind of the checklist or the to-do list that Democrats have teed up possibly for the lame duck session?
Yeah, it tackles every issue that we love and care about here at FRC. We just talked about marriage and religious freedom, talk about the life issue. They've passed this Women's Health Protection Act out of the House twice now. This is not your grandma's codify Roe v. Wade bill. This would bludgeon all pro-life laws across the states. You talk about the For the People Act, federalizing all elections across the board, mail-in votes, you name it. And that's just sort of the categories of bills we're seeing. But even though those are sort of those show votes they've had throughout the years, it's cautious to look at what these topics are. Funding for abortion, attacks on religious freedom, attacks on marriage, federalizing elections. Even if they can't get these bills through the finish line, we're going to be on guard to see if even little pieces of this show up in these must-pass bills come the home stretch this couple weeks.
Okay, so let me just step back for just a moment, Connor. Let's talk about kind of the process of lame duck. Why do we have this? What is it? And why is it a reason for concern?
Yeah, people might not be familiar. Lame duck, what does this mean? What this really means is when a party that's in power, right now it's the Democrats, President Biden, he's got the House and the Senate are going out of power. A lot of pundits suspect the Republicans take back the House, potentially the Senate now too. And so as a party goes out of power, they try to cling and get through as much as they can in those final days while they still have legislative power. If you're the Democrats, that might not be for a while. You look at the 2024 Senate map, they have a ton of tough races. The prospects for Joe Biden, if he runs again for president, aren't looking great. And so this is their chance when politicians have just run for re-election and they're not going to face the voter for a long period of time, that they try to get things through where the voters and the constituents don't have as much say. So that's sort of the dynamics that are going to play out in these 5-6 weeks once we get back after November 8th.
And that's not speculation. That's based upon historical precedent where you have not only members who just stood for re-election, and so they have this, and there's a lot of truth in it that the American voters will forget because there'll be some probably other egregious act that occurs that eclipses what they did in a lame duck session. But you also have members that are retiring, that will be leaving. And so in many ways you have a Congress and a Senate that will be setting policy for the next Congress, because we've got a number of appropriations bills that may tie the hands of the incoming Congress that could be decided by this lame duck session. Now, on these issues that we were just enumerating that we are so concerned about as it pertains to marriage in particular and the threats to religious freedom, I go back to 2010 in that lame duck session. That's when the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell took place, which really was the first domino to begin to fall that created this cascading effect that I think led up to Obergefell. And here we are in this lame duck session 12 years later, where we will see potentially this effort to culminate that with a redefinition of marriage in statute, which will then be used as kind of a green light to persecute believers, Christians, others who have failed to come along in this redefinition of marriage and human sexuality.
Yeah, it's almost bookends, right? Like you said, with Don't Ask, Don't Tell, they tried to push it through the defense authorization bill at first, were unsuccessful because of Senate filibuster. They come back in December, and once the political pressure was off because of retirees and incumbents that maybe lost their races, they got it done. And again, we've been wrecking the policy implications of that for over a decade now. And so that's the same thing. We cannot let this get through in this lame duck session when the political eyes are off, maybe the current politicians in Congress. And like you said, it's not just tying tying the hands of this next Congress, but state legislators and others across the country with a bill as egregious as this Disrespect for Marriage Act.
So let's talk, Connor, for just a moment. What states, what senators are we watching in this lame duck session that might be tempted? And I'm talking about Republicans, not necessarily the Democrats. We know the Democrats are probably going to be in lockstep for this, but you could have some Republicans that could fall off the wagon on this and leave the reservation. So what do we need to be focused on there?
Yeah, it's really two categories. It's those senators, a lot are retiring. Senator Toomey from Pennsylvania, Senator Blunt of Missouri, Senator Portman's already expressed support out of Ohio. So they're retiring. They're not coming back to Congress in January. So these are their final votes in the Senate. And then you look at other senators that maybe would have just won re-election. Senator Todd Young's running for re-election in Indiana. He hasn't made any statements assuring that he's going to be a no vote on this. And we've mentioned him again, Senator Tillis, who just won 2 years ago. So again, it's going to be a couple more years till he has to face the voters. And so there's a key states, North Carolina, Missouri, Ohio, Pennsylvania, where your senators are on the line of whether they could be that 10th vote, that 60th vote rather, to codify Obergefell decision into law.
Yeah, as you mentioned, there are some who have not made statements either way on this in the Republican conference in the Senate, and so I think it's going to be very important that people communicate with their senators on this, especially. This is one of those cases, especially if you have a Republican senator, to express to them your concern about the threat that this would pose to religious freedom. Now, we didn't go into the details, but one of the solutions, if you will, that's being put forward, that Senator Tillis of North Carolina, by the way, if you're in North Carolina, you clearly need to be speaking to Senator Tillis and Senator Burr, who is retiring. Senator Burr actually voted in 2010 for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So he is I think he's a problem on this. So I think if you live in North Carolina, both of your senators need to hear from you. But Senator Tillis in particular is working on what he calls a solution, which their solution simply deals with like churches and religious institutions. The problem with that is that the First Amendment guarantees religious freedom to individuals, not institutions. And this would put individuals still at risk through this redefinition of marriage.
Yeah, we've seen it so many times. We've even still see litigation on, individuals who are photographers for weddings, cake bakers, host wedding venues, you name it. These are just individuals trying to live out their faith in their everyday lives. And those are the people that have to bear the legal fees, the public attention and outcry of just people that want to practice their faith and still serve their constituents. And these are the kinds of people that would not be protected from these short-term fixes covering these institutions. That's the real people that are put in the front lines. And just to talk about adoption agencies for a second, we just saw the overturning Roe v. Wade, where now 13 states are actively protecting life from conception, if not better, where adoption agencies need to be on the front lines, and these Christian and Catholic adoption agencies may be tossed to the wayside just because they choose not to adopt out same-sex couples.
All right, Connor, before we wrap up here, are there resources and tools available for people as they look at this lame duck, prepare for this lame duck, and to communicate with their senators?
Yes, we got several ways you can communicate with your senators about Disrespect for Marriage Act, this Women in the Draft and Defense Authorization, as well as all the other lame duck issues at our frcaction.org page. You can check that out. It has an action website where you can go right to contact your senators directly. We've helped you out and done all the work for you. You just got to let them know how you really feel about these issues. And your voice is needed now more than ever as these final days end up the end of this year and some important pieces of legislation come before our Congress.
Final question for you, Connor. You're on Capitol Hill. You're talking with the staff members on a regular basis. Does it matter when our listeners and viewers contact their offices?
It sure does. These members of Congress and senators like to hear a lot more from their folks back home than us here in D.C.
All right. Connor Semelsberger, always great to see you. Thanks so much. Doing a great job. Keep it up.
Glad to be on, Tony.